In this Vue.js tutorial, we are going to take a deep dive and look at the lifecycle hooks provided from the Vue framework. Now, we are going to analyze the lifecycle diagram and then go and implement this into a Vue application. We're also going to extend it because this lifecycle set of hooks and what they list in the documentation is helpful for understanding because it's a helpful visual, but I think that it's missing a couple of elements that I personally have had to implement into my own production Vue applications, and so I think it will help for you to see those as well. So we're going to walk through quite a bit of material in this guide. So I have a Vue application running right here in the background, and we're going to be looking primarily just at a few different components. So we are going to be looking at a dashboard component, a Vue component right here, and then that has the nested login component. And so what we're going to be doing isn't as much building in this guide. We're instead going to be looking and analyzing to see how exactly the life cycle process works. If you are not aware of this, if you've never heard of the life cycle, or if you're just trying to understand it for the first time, the best analogy that helped me is trying to compare a Vue component to us humans. So as a human, we are born, we go through different stages in life, and then, even though it may seem dark, we all die at some point. Well, that's the way a Vue component works too. A Vue component is born. We say that a Vue component is created. Then it has a number of things happen. It has changes go on, such as data changes and updates and those kinds of things. And then at a certain time, it also dies, or we say that it is destroyed. So what we can do with Vue is we can actually listen for and capture those events, each one of those, from created all the way through destroyed, and then update the application based on the state of the component. So hopefully that starts to make sense, but what really helped me understand the lifecycle hooks and the entire process was really just getting in and implementing each one of the methods. I'll provide in the show notes a link to this documentation, because that can help to have a visual, but I think what helps the most is just going in and writing the code. So I'm going to switch back to our application here, and then opening up Visual Studio Code here, you can see that we have our home page component, which is just rendering out some content, and then our login component, and that's it, pretty much it. It's pretty basic right now. So we're going to start in the dashboard, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to start listing some of these hooks. Now, right now, we have a pretty basic setup where we have our data function, then we have a list of the components that we are registering, and then we have one custom method. I usually, by convention, place these lifecycle hooks right above the methods. I like to have my methods at the very bottom so I know exactly where they're at, but you could technically put these anywhere inside of the script tag as long as it's right after the default curly braces. Now I'm going to just list off a couple basic ones here first. So I'm going to say before create, and it is a regular method, so you have to have the parens right after it. And then I'm going to console log and then say before create, just so we know exactly what's happening here. And then for this one, I'm also going to say this afterwards, because this can be really helpful in understanding what we're referencing. And then make sure you put a comma there, and then after that, say created. Now, unlike some other methods or names inside of Vue, these are reserved words. So before create is something provided by Vue directly. Created is something provided by Vue. So these are reserved, and they are names and functions that are built directly into the Vue source code. So I'm going to copy this console log here and then change this to say created, and I'm not going to pass in this or else it'll make the output a little bit messy, and you'll notice that this that it's referencing is going to be the same for all these elements. So let's just start with these two, and then we'll get into some of the other ones after this. So switching back to the browser, I'm going to clear the output, hit refresh, and now you can see that we have some console log statements here. We have before create and then created. So both of these worked. So they were triggered. Notice that we didn't do anything. All we did was we listed them out inside of the component. Now, when I used this call, so when I said before create and then passed in this, all this is doing is giving a reference to this component, meaning the dashboard component. And the way we can know that is this is an object. And so if I click on here, I can see everything inside of everything that has references to. So you can see it has a list of attributes. So if I click on attributes, you can see it's an object, and then inside of here are all kinds of different object values. Then this one is the one I think is pretty neat and very helpful, is children. You can see that our dashboard component does have two children. You can even just go and reference them here. We have a homepage component, or a homepage content component, and then a login component. And that is what this is referencing here. And then it has a element so that we know that it's a div. You can hover over it and you can see what the element entails. It can have listeners, you can have a list and a reference to its parent, and so that is kind of a helpful way of understanding what this is. But I want this guide to specifically focus on the lifecycle components, but I just put that in there just so you can see that you have a direct reference to this inside of each one of these lifecycle hooks. So you saw that these were already triggered. Let's move down. I'm also going to get rid of this and clear it out just so we have some nice clean output. Now I'm going to go and I'm going to list all the rest of the lifecycle methods that we have access to. So the next one's going to be mounted, and then the one after mounted, or actually, you know what, I forgot one. There's one right before it called before mount. And so we have access to before mount here, then mounted, and then from there we have our update methods. So this one is going to be before update. And there's going to be something a little bit tricky with the update method that I'm going to show you here in a second. Then the next one is updated. So we have updated, and then we just have two more. So we're going to have our before destroy, and then we're going to have after that one our destroy. So before destroy, and then destroyed. I do like the naming that they went with here. If anyone's ever been through my tutorial for the React lifecycle hooks, React went with a little bit more challenging of a naming process, and it makes it a little bit harder to remember all of them. But Vue, I really like the names that they went with, because you can pretty much, as long as you can remember half of them, that means you have remembered all of them. You have before create, created, before mount, mounted, before update, updated, before destroy, and then destroyed. It's a very kind of a common approach to being able to name them, and so you just have to memorize about 4 items and then you'll know all of them. So now that we have that, let's go and switch back to the browser here, and I'm going to refresh, and let's see when each one of these is triggered. So right now we have before create, created, before mount, and mounted. So before we did anything, notice we didn't do anything on this page, nothing happened. All we did was we hit refresh and the page loaded, and 4 items here were triggered. Now let's take a look at that lifecycle visual once again, because it helps to kind of see all of the items that took place during that process. It may not seem like anything happened, but as you can tell, a lot of things were happening in the background. So when the lifecycle diagram says new view, this means that a new component is being instantiated. So it's going to run the initializer, which means it's going to be initialized, it's going to be created, and then it's going to set up all of its data and all of its dependencies, everything like that is being brought in. Before create and created are going to manage those processes. So if you need access to something very early on in the component lifecycle, then these are going to be the lifecycle hooks that you would use. Then the created method then is going to take it from there. It's going to take it, it's going to see, does it have an element option? If no, then it's going to perform one process. If yes, then it's going to see, does it have a template option? And so these items are really related directly to the data that's being rendered out onto the screen. It's checking to see what kind of values that it's going to be presenting, if it is going to be presenting them to the user. Moving down, you can see from there it's going to check to see, does it compile the template into a render function? If yes, it's going to come this way. If no, it's going, or if it has a template option, then it's going to then say compile the elements outer HTML as a template. Now, if some of this is confusing, don't worry. It's very confusing especially if you're new to Vue. I more just want to kind of show you that as you are building your Vue applications out, you're going to be noticing a lot of things are happening behind the scenes, and sometimes that can be a little bit confusing or intimidating. And I want to show you that there's actually just a set of processes that Vue is going through. It's almost like a set of checkboxes, and it's saying, okay, I need to know what this component is trying to do. Is it trying to show the user something? Is it just a small presentation component, or does it have all kinds of data, and do I need to run all these processes? So that's really what this life cycle is about. It's Vue trying to figure out what it needs to do. And then from that process, it goes into the before mount process, and then it creates the element, and it does all kinds of different Vue related items, and then comes down into mounted. Now, one thing I will tell you from experience, I built out multiple production applications in Vue, and I will tell you that I probably spend, when it comes to these lifecycle hooks, I probably spend about 90% of my time using just 2 or 3 of them. And so I'm really going to focus on those, and I'll let you know which ones they are. The mounted hook is most likely the one I use the very most, because this means that Vue has already figured out what kind of component it's dealing with. It has initialized all of the different elements that it needs from a template perspective, from the div element. It's set up its own version of the DOM on the page, everything like that, and it's mounted. So this is where I do a lot of the setup for my components, is in this hook right here. Now, once it is mounted, that means that it is loaded up on the screen. You can see, if you come back here, that mounted was the very final step in the process when the page loaded. And then from there, once it is loaded, now we get into what happens when something gets updated on the screen. Remember, one of the top reasons why you use frameworks like Vue or Angular or React is because you want your application to be dynamic. You want the ability for a user to click buttons and type into forms, and to have other actions and other behavior be automatically triggered inside of that application. And so what goes on at this stage of the process is very critical. Now, you may have noticed that our before update and our update did not get triggered. Now, I want to show you something a little bit interesting. This may be a little bit odd to you, but you know that we have a login form right here. And just to review what that looks like, we are calling a login component. So we're calling an external component, and then we have this update listener inside of the login component. Well, you would think that that would mean that when the data gets updated in login, it's going to update our dashboard. But let's see exactly what happens. So if I type an email in here and click on login, you can see that it did console log some data out. That is all that's happening inside of this update login details. We're emitting an update event and we're passing in the email. And that's all we're doing. But notice that our before update and our updated lifecycle hooks were not triggered. And that is because we didn't actually update anything inside of our dashboard component. Everything was encapsulated inside of the login. Now, if I were to take these, so I'm going to copy these functions here, and I'll place them inside of the login component. Now, if I do this, and let's just be clear here, that we'll say before update from login, and then updated from login. If I hit save now, and come back here and start typing, even as I'm typing, before I even submit the form, it is updating. We have the before update and we have the update, and both are only in the login. We're still not making any changes directly in the component. So this is something that can be very confusing if you've never seen it before, because you may think that a parent's components, if as any child component updates, you would think that it receives all of those. But Vue is very good at isolating those update events. So if you want to capture something in the update stage, you need to make sure that you are doing it in the component itself. So let's stretch that just so you believe me. Let's go into the dashboard, and I'm going to add one more little form element here. So I'm going to say input text, and we'll connect this. So I'll say we'll bind it directly to the dashboard data model. So we'll say v model, and we'll just say something like maybe subdomain. It could be anything. It could be ASDF. It doesn't matter. You can call this whatever you want, and then add in a subdomain data element here, so we have something that it can bind to. Hit save, and now you can see we have this new form field. I'm going to close this, and if I start typing anything, you can see that now that before update and the updated lifecycle hooks were triggered. So that is one of the biggest takeaways I want you to have from this entire guide, is understanding the way the update cycle works, because that's something that you're going to want to tap into as you're building out the applications, and understanding that it's encapsulated inside of the component that's being updated is very critical. So that is how the update process works. And now we have two more, and I'm going to describe what they do, and then I'm going to explain what their role should be, and then I'm going to show you two more that weren't listed. And these other two are ones that aren't technically lifecycle hooks, but I think they should be seen in the same light because they are used with the same type of intention, and hopefully it'll make sense when I walk through it. But so what before destroy and destroyed do is they are watching for when the component is removed, when it's taken off of the stack. So let's say that we have all of our data here, and then a user goes and clicks on home. Now they're redirected to the home component, and what happens, you can see right here, is our dashboard component has been destroyed, and it is no longer there. And so where the main rule of what is going on here with this lifecycle hook is this gives you the ability to be able to clear off any processes. So a very common thing that I use this for is, say that you have an application and one of the components has a timer in it. So I built a invoicing application that had a timer on one of the pages where you could record your time as you were working, and that timer was running anytime that component was alive. Well, when the user left that page, the timer needed needed to stop, or else the timer would keep on running in the background. So the destroyed hook allowed me to do that. I was able to say, okay, we're going to destroy that timer. We're going to stop it from running, and then that way we don't have any memory leaks. That's really what the destroyed hooks are for, is for being able to clear out any processes that you do not want to keep running. So let's go back to the dashboard, and we're going to go through two more methods, and these are not listed inside of these lifecycle hooks because technically they are route watchers. And when I mean route watcher, I mean they're watching for changes in the route by the user, which that is technically not associated with the lifecycle hook, but it is associated with the way a user's interacting with the component, and that's a reason why I wanted to include it in this deep dive. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to come down here under destroyed, and I'm going to add a new hook. So this is going to say before route enter, and then this takes 3 arguments: to, from, and next. Now inside of here, so what this is doing, and then also make sure you're giving a comma here at the very end. So what before route enter does is it listens for when a user is trying to access this route. So the most common time that you're going to use this is to check to see, so say that you have a part of your application that you only want a authorized user to access. That's a very common use case. Well, this allows you to do that. So let's say that we are connected to an authorization API, and I say const logged in, and for right now we're just going to assume they logged in successfully. The API said yes, this user is authorized, so we're going to say it's true. Then I can say if logged in, and then that assumes that this is true. So saying if logged in JavaScript is the same thing as saying if logged in equals true. And so I'm going to say if they are logged in, then I want to return, or I want to run the process next. So what next does is this is a reserved function inside of before route enter, and so you can see it's this next value. What next represents is where we want the user to go next. If we want them to be able to continue to this page, then we just say next without any arguments, and that's what we have right here. We're saying the user's logged in, so yes, we should allow them to come here. But if they're not logged in, then we want another process to take place. So here I can say next, and then as a string pass in the path I want them to go to, which in this case means I want them to be redirected to the home page. So this should give us the identical behavior we have right now because we're just hard coding true in, and then we'll change it to false and see if it works. So I'm going to come right here, and I'm going to try to come to the dashboard. If I hit return, everything works because it's returning true. Now what happens though if this is false? So I'm going to hit save, and now if I try to access the dashboard, if I hit return here, you can see it automatically redirected me to the home page. So hopefully you can kind of see why I wanted to include these types of processes in a guide like this, because this isn't part of the component lifecycle, but it is a part of the lifecycle of the user accessing a component. And so I thought that this would be something important. I thought it was missed out from a lot of the other tutorials I've seen. So I'm going to now make this true again so we can access the dashboard, and we can verify that by going to dashboard. And we just have one more function that I want to go through. So this next one is, imagine that you have a scenario where you have a user typing in a form and they accidentally click to leave to a different page, not realizing that their data hasn't been saved. This is a pretty common use case. Now you might think that you would put that in the before destroy hook, but that's not really what before destroy is for. That's not its role. You remember, the role of these two is really just to to provide a way of cleaning up any processes. If you want to try to catch the user before they leave, the best and the recommended function to use is what is called the before route leave function. It takes the same to, from, and next arguments. And then from there, what we can do is we can just ask the user a question. So I'll say const answer equals window dot location, or no, actually not location. This one's window dot confirm. And then, are you sure your changes won't be saved? And then from there, all we're going to do, when window confirm gives us the ability to receive a Boolean value. So if they say OK, then it's the same as storing true in answer. And if they say cancel, it's the same as storing false. So if I say if the answer, which means if it's true, then I want to allow them to go to whatever page it was they wanted to go to. Else, so if they hit cancel, then I want to say next, false, which means that before route leave is going to say, okay, turns out that user didn't want to leave, and so do not allow them to leave. That's why it's called before route leave. So now, it looks like I have a typo. Oh, and yeah, it's a good reminder. Each one of these methods, and this is a case for all of Vue, whenever you have these methods, they are objects. And so because at the end of the day, export default is an object, it's a set of key value pairs, then you have to make sure you list a comma after each one of those. But that hitting save, that should fix it. And yes, we're good to go. So now we're on the dashboard. Now, if I click on home, you can see it has this little pop-up and it says, are you sure your changes won't be saved? If I hit cancel, then nothing happens. We are kept on that page and the user doesn't lose their data. If I hit home and hit OK, it allows me to be redirected. So that's a way where you're able to capture a user to make sure that they don't do something like leave a page and lose data that they might have lost. And so that is a very helpful function. So one last item I want to leave you with. We've covered all of the methods and we've discussed them, but the very first question that I had when I started going through these different elements was, why do we need the before create and the created, the before mount and mounted? Why couldn't we just use created, mounted, and updated? And one thing I will say is, like I mentioned earlier, I really only use a few of these for every application I build. It's very rare that I will use before mount, before create, or really even created. The ones I use the most are going to be mounted, before update, updated, and then destroyed. And the tasks I perform in each of those, and just as one side note, I do use these constantly, but they're not in Lifecycle hooks, so I don't count them in the list. I use these in pretty much every single application a number of times. The before route enter is the most common one I use just because it allows me to have a guard in front of each component. But getting back to the Lifecycle hooks, the mounted gives me pretty much all of the same access to data, and it gives me access to the life cycle, or the point of the life of the component that before create, created, or before mount gives me. So that's a reason why I really use mounted for anything such as calling an outside API, storing the data, and then having it render on the page. That's typically what I use mounted for. Occasionally I will use that inside of created, but most of the time I'm using that inside of mounted. Before update is helpful for checking for data validation issues. So that's what I use it for. So if you have a form with a number of validations and you do not want the user to be able to submit it and update the component without running through those validations, before update is helpful for that. updated is helpful for updating the page after a change has occurred. So say the user hit save, they submitted some data, then updated allows me to capture that and then update the page automatically. And then like we talked about, the destroy items, and I typically just use destroyed. That's usually where I am destroying things such as timers or WebSockets or anything like that. So I know that was a longer guide. I really wanted to give you a single point of reference that you could look back at in the future, because this is something that I even have to look at quite often when I'm building out Vue apps, is seeing the full list of each one of these lifecycle hooks and when they're called. And so I wanted to give you a single guide that you could point to and say, okay, yeah, this is a full list of items. This is their syntax, their name, this is how they're called, and this is how they work with components. So great job if you went through that. You should now have a good idea of how the lifecycle hook process works inside of Vue.js.